Howdy, folks. Welcome to the Daily Coin. My name is Rory, and today is Wednesday, September the 28th, 2016, and it is my great honor and distinct pleasure to welcome to the show for the first time V, the Guerrilla Economist. And V has worked with some of the top commodity trading firms and investment banks in the world. He has also contributed to a variety of private think tanks, which we're going to get into here in just a minute, and which help create investment policies. And that's something that's at the top of my list, V. And his track record is uncanny and well documented on his appearances with Steve Quayle and Doug Hagman. You can find all his great work along with his great team of analysts at roguemoney.net. V, welcome to the show.
Hey, Rory, it's great to be on. I'm excited. So many things going on. I can't even keep track of it all, man. It's one thing exploding, then another thing blowing up, and another thing, falling apart, and somebody else is fainting, and someone else is having a heart attack. Who can keep track of it all?
Nobody.
So John Cryan from Deutsche Bank last night was crying to the German government for a bailout, and today Janet Yellen is yelling that everything is fine and dandy. So I think when the dust settles, Cryan and Yellen should join together and start their own firm.
They should. That would be good. And from my perspective, V, I don't think that Deutsche Bank is going to be allowed to fail. Their derivatives book would blow the system apart.
Correct.
And what can the ECB, the Fed, the Bank of England, possibly the Bank of Japan do in order? What can these guys do to avoid a complete meltdown? Because it seems like their options are kind of limited at this point. Or can they just print up all the digits needed to make the bleeding stop?
Yeah. You know what? It's a very interesting question. There's a couple of theories that are being floated out right now, a couple of things that are being war gamed as we speak. One of which is having Germany, the government of Germany, to hold about 25% of Deutsche Bank's ownership. Hold 25% of the bank. But do they really want to do that? And nobody wants to touch Deutsche Bank because it's so damn radioactive. Deutsche Bank it's basically, this is the scenario. If I were to paint a scenario about what the heck is going on, picture everybody's in a room, and then somebody opens a door, takes a grenade, pulls the pin, rolls it on the floor, and then everybody's standing around in a circle trying to decide who's going to be the one that's going to jump on top of the grenade and save the rest of us. That grenade is Deutsche Bank. So that's the hesitancy that you see with the German government, with the ECB, with the Bank of England, with the BOJ. Nobody wants the Bank of England and the BOJ don't even want to touch it.
Right.
You're looking at even Wall Street is having jitters about Deutsche Bank. Nobody wants to touch it, but something has to be done with it. So I think this is an interesting scenario. Deutsche Bank is worse than Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers combined. Okay, it's 10 times worse. Deutsche Bank says, our derivatives, we paid it down to 52 trillion, from down from 70 some odd trillion, and that's still not any sort of welcome. That's no reprieve right there.
No,
because what they've really done is they've offloaded their derivatives. They converted them into what's called cocoa bonds, which are basically turning a dead asset into an equity and trying to sell it out, into the marketplace. Okay, but the problem is those things have expiration dates, and those chickens are coming home to roost. So all this paying off of debt and everything's under control, and then last night, John Cryan did exactly what the executives at Lehman Brothers did. And he said, everything is fine. We have easy liquidity. Everything's okay. The bank's fine. And then we seen Lehman do that. And then by the next day, Lehman was done for. So I remember being at my desk when Lehman Brothers popped. And I remember that sinking feeling, that sickening feeling I had in the pit of my stomach saying, oh boy, here we go. And I'm having that same feeling again this morning. So it's a very, very not only scary situation for the global economy to begin with, I mean, we're on the precipice of something huge, man. I mean, everything is happening at once. You got that Deutsche Bank situation. You have, the Congress just passed. I mean, the Senate just passed the JASTA bill. Okay, which
Yes.
is huge. That
Huge.
means goodbye petrodollar, because the
Yep.
American dream was built on Saudi pipelines. That's the reality of it. So goodbye petrodollar. At the same time, we have, you know, this whole presidential race. You have China coming out with the SDR. I mean, we have a litany of things that we need to discuss, man.
Yes. And Jasta wasn't even on my radar for this conversation, but the Senate minus Harry Reid
Harry
voted it
Reid.
down. I mean, and that tells you everything you need to know about Harry Reid and about how the love that he has for his constituency.
Right. Oh yeah.
The heck with you guys. I'm doing what I want to do. And
uh,
but as far as the implications on the petrodollar, I would imagine that whole scene's about to change.
yeah.
I would imagine that Saudi Arabia, who has been recently talking to Russia and China about oil sales, I would imagine that they can just look at it and go, well, good luck.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Because this is why one of the things that people don't realize is, King Salman is he's on his deathbed as well. King Salman, who's taken over for King Faisal. Salman is not well. He has dementia. He's on his way out. There is a lot of intricacies at play in the Middle East. Okay, a lot of intricacies. One of which is that the crown prince that he's named to succeed him is Mohammed bin Salam, or also known as MBS. Okay, Prince Salman, Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, is interesting, and the reason why he's interesting is that the guy's young. He's in his 30s. Okay, he is very pragmatic. He wants to diversify Saudi Arabia away from just petroleum, because that's all they have. He wants to make Saudi Arabia kind of like the Middle Eastern equivalent of the United Arab Emirates, where you look at the UAE. They have, for those that don't know, that'll be the famous city called Dubai and Abu Dhabi. But the UAE has everything from oil, from tech, from marketing, from banking. They got a lot of things going on over there in the
Yes, they
UAE.
do.
So he wants to make Saudi Arabia the same thing, get them away from just petroleum, and he's been doing a lot of reforms to get that done. And it's interesting in the sense that yes, there's conflict between Saudi Arabia and Russia and Syria and that whole trifecta, that whole area of operation, so to speak. But one of the things that people need to be mindful of is this: the successor to the throne in Saudi Arabia is not well liked by a lot of Westerners. He's not well. What's the word I'm looking for? Even in his own house, there are those who feel that he's not qualified to do the job. And on top of that, the only reason why King Salman picked MBS as his successor versus his two other older, much more experienced brothers is simply this: MBS, Mohammed bin Salam, he is the son. Okay, he is the son of King Salman's favorite wife. His favorite wife happens to be Syrian.
Oh,
So MBS is half Saudi, half Syrian. This is going to play very interesting into the theater of operations. Now, ever since MBS has taken an active role in the government in Saudi Arabia, what has he been doing? Well, he's seen what's going to happen with the U.S. The U.S. He knew. Look, Saudi Arabia, and I've talked to some very high level Saudi, connected individuals. When I say high level, I mean literally like blood. Uh, what I've been told is this: they knew the U.S. threw Saudi Arabia under the bus when they did not deal. They did not allow Saudi Arabia to deal with the situation that was going on and erupting in Bahrain with the Arab Spring over there. They knew what was happening when the U.S. is not showing that much level of support with the Saudi offensive in Yemen. The only reason why they want Yemen is because Yemen is a major deep water port. They need that in order to make their Saudi quote unquote equivalent to the UAE. They need that deep water port. Okay. They know that the U.S. has been throwing them under the bus, especially when the things started coming out about the 18 pages of the missing 9/11 report,
right.
the 9/11 omission report. They knew it was coming. So what they have been doing, the Saudis have been gearing up, and this goes even further back. About 2 years ago, when I reported on the fact that a Saudi prince was carjacked. His whole entourage was carjacked by special operations guys. And this goes back a few years where the Saudis, for the longest time, have been preparing for a time where the U.S. will throw them under the bus, where the petrodollar will be done. So they have been cozying up to the Russians. They have been dealing with the Russians for quite some time. And the carjacking of the Saudi prince in Paris, no less, where 300,000 euros was taken off the guy, but most importantly, secret documents, and those secret documents tie in to the dealings that not only Saudi Arabia was having with Russia, but the integral connections that Saudi Arabia had with French oil company called Total Petroleum, specifically Christophe de Margerie. And I was one of the first guys that talked about this and talked about the connection. Christophe de Margerie and Total Petroleum is very close friends with Putin, and they were working closely with the Saudis. And what happened was the Saudi prince gets carjacked, and shortly thereafter, Christophe de Margerie, his plane, mysteriously explodes on a runway in Moscow. Okay, so you're killing two birds with one stone. And Total Petroleum is very close with Russia, even though it's a French company. They work very closely with Russia. They were the ones that was caught red-handed in what was called the South Pars pipeline deal. This is where they were helping to develop oil fields for the Iranians. Okay, and the money and the financing was done through BNP Paribas, and the logistic support was provided by Russian and Total Petroleum engineers. That's the main reason that Eric Holder, 2 years ago, fined BNP Paribas $8.5 billion for that specifically. But the bank that cleared every single one of those transactions also was none other than J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan got a slap on the wrist and he walked away scot-free. So the reason why I'm bringing all this up, there's a greater underlying agenda that's been at work for quite some number of years. I want to make the listeners aware to this, that they knew that the dollar's doomed. Either the dollar is going to implode and explode and be no more. They know that. The handwriting was on the wall. And they knew that, when this occurs, as we get closer and closer, as the days fall off the calendar, when the dollar dies, they knew that there's a chance that, desperate regimes do very stupid things. They knew that the U.S. will probably try to throw the Saudis under the bus. And that's exactly what happened. OPEC is completely fractured. Okay, the last OPEC meeting in Vienna in December was it was horrendous. It was absolutely horrendous. They behaved more like a disjointed cartel than anything else. It was every man for himself. So the Middle East is now primed and ready for a transition out of the petrodollar and into something else. Okay, but you'll see the war drums are beating all the more louder as we approach the day of transition. So, Rory, it's a very, very touchy situation in the Middle East, how that ties up with the dollar, because that whole JASTA thing, that thing goes into effect. They're going to probably wait until Friday to get that in, right?
Right.
God knows what's going to happen Monday. When we wake up Monday, will the Saudis dump? Because they promised they will. They promised They will dump every bit of U.S. treasuries they have, okay? If that thing goes into effect, and Obama couldn't veto it the whole 9 yards, it's on. So this is some crazy convergence that's happening between the JASTA situation, which ties very cogently to the petrodollar. It is intricately involved, intricately wrapped up in the petrodollar, as well as what is occurring with Deutsche Bank, which is a derivative monster, which is tied into Monte dei Paschi, Italy's biggest bank, which is tied into Hetta Asset Management, which is one of the big banks in Austria, Commerce Bank, another big one in Germany, tied into Crédit Agricole in France, tied into Société Générale in France. All these banks are all tied into Deutsche Bank, and so is J.P. Morgan, and Barclays. So this is a major derivative trigger that everybody's worried about. And in spite of the fact that, yes, the Wall Street numbers, the Dow is incredibly manipulated. I had a buddy of mine who said this, that the Dow is bulletproof. I tend to agree with him because no matter how bad of a news you'll have, and I firmly believe this. I believe that the Dow will probably go 30,000 points before this is all said and done. And it'll be 30,000 points. It'll be like a white ivory tower in a land of desolation and destitution, because that's where we're heading, Rory.
That's what it sounds like. And with that backdrop that you just painted between Deutsche Bank, JASTA, OPEC falling apart, petrodollar obviously in dire straits, the great potential because like you said, the Saudi said if you pass that, we're going to dump. I think it was 750 million or 750 billion in treasuries.
It'll be more because the funniest thing is, Rory, nobody knows exactly how much the Saudis have. You see, every partner that the U.S. has sold treasury notes to has a listing exactly of how much they have, except for one, Saudi Arabia. They always felt it was very strategic that Saudi Arabia never disclosed how much U.S. debt they hold, because they are able to exchange the petroleum, buy U.S. debt, and then using the dollar recycling, so to speak, and reinvesting that treasury debt back into the U.S. markets. So we technically don't know exactly how much the Saudis have. So that's the scary thing.
Well, and here's another. This is what I wanted to layer on top of all that. Today is September the 28th. At
Yep.
the end of business on September the 30th, the yuan is added to the SDR basket.
Yep.
So you've got all of these different dynamics playing out, and then you've got this situation happening. It's being this, and it's a big deal. I'm
Right.
sorry, it's a very big deal. And what's going to happen is that the weighting of the other four currencies is going to change,
Yes.
with the Federal Reserve note taking the smallest hit, and I think it's around 2.5% as far as their weighting. And one of the more important aspects of this change is the right to veto.
Yeah.
And China, in conjunction with the other BRICS nations, collectively have a stronger voice in the IMF voting booth. How do you see that in light of everything that you just said, V? How do you see that playing out with the U.S.? How's the U.S. going to react when China vetoes an important policy that's set forth by the U.S.? They going to start throwing nukes around, or what's going to happen with that? I mean, we obviously have an extremely volatile situation right now with everything that you just described, and now you throw this aspect on it, and it's like, oh my God, what else could go wrong?
That's a very interesting point, man. I mean, when you look at the IMF in general is a very, very, very interesting organization. Some people give it way too much more power and credence than what it's actually worth. The reality is the IMF is currently an unfunded white elephant, meaning nobody, the U.S., which is traditionally was the main agent that provides funding for the IMF, hasn't funded the IMF in over 2.5 years. The primary funder has been China. So for China to step in and say, "Hey, you know what? We want our currency in the IMF," and the IMF finally giving into it is no surprise. And also take note that is about almost a year ago that Christine Lagarde, the person that I call the giraffe-necked woman of the IMF, Christine Lagarde was the one who said, "Do not be surprised if one day the IMF is headquartered in Beijing." So what's happening with the IMF and what's happening with Lagarde is it's quite incredible, because IMF is being I've said this for a while now. The IMF is going to be absorbed into the AIIB, because the big player on the block is not the IMF anymore. It's the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. The AIIB is the rival of the IMF. It is set up
Right.
as an IMF alternative. It's made up of 56 nations, and it's a powerful, influential force. So for China to get into the IMF, it is a Trojan horse maneuver. It
Yes.
absolutely compromises the United States, and it will eventually, over time, bring the IMF within the tractor beam pull of the agenda of the AIIB and the BRICS nations at large. The U.S. is in quite a quandary, because recently was the IMF actually had to go and ask the AIIB for a loan. So that shows you where things are headed. It is definitely a Trojan horse maneuver, because what they're doing is this. If you look at not only the IMF, you look at also all the central banks, and also the 24 of the largest economies on the planet. China has set up currency swaps with all of them. And a lot of people have said, China, SDR, and IMF, that the SDR is going to be the new world reserve currency. It's not heading that way. Nobody wants world reserve currency status. China, least of all.
Right.
They don't want that. They want, what they're heading for is currency swaps. What they want is is a gold trade settlement note to settle in gold credits, some sort of a new type of gold standard that's being brought out. That's what they want. And the biggest move to the SDR, I'm sorry, the biggest move from China into the IMF is not a currency move, and nobody's talked about this. You're going to hear it here first, folks. It's a gold control move. Now, people say, "Well, what do you mean by that?" Well, it's like this. I work in the gold industry. I work for I work with, and I'm a partner of one of the. I'm not an actual partner, but an affiliate partner. I work very closely with one of the largest gold precious metal, procurement companies on the planet. And we work at the LBMA level. We deal with sovereigns, institutional investors. So a lot of heavy hitting clients that we deal with. My partner, him by himself, he sold 115 tons of silver last month. Just to give you an idea of the demand for silver, yet the prices are so ridiculously low. That's a little inside information of those who want to buy. And same thing with gold. We move tons of it per month. I will tell you this: gold is one of the most regulated, most strictly watched commodities on the planet. And it's really not a commodity. I hate calling it a commodity. It's really money. Okay?
It's money. Gold is money.
It's gold is money. And the central banks have a great deal of gold. They're the biggest buyers of gold the last few years. Okay? So, but if the central bank ever wants to bring gold to market, to sell it in the open market, they can't just do that. They first have to get a permission. Guess from who? Guess from where? The IMF.
Exactly.
The IMF has to authorize that sale of that gold. Otherwise, too much gold getting into the market upsets and can destroy the fiat market. So they're very, very careful not to unload too much. So China getting involved in the IMF, it is a gold angle. I truly believe it. I don't have all the evidence before me, but I think a lot of it is starting to point in that direction. It is definitely more of a gold play because it works, it works very synergistically with the AIIB. It works very synergistically with the setup they have at the Shanghai Gold Exchange,
Yes.
And people will say, well, if China gets into the IMF, the yuan doesn't have enough liquidity, this, that, and the other. People are still viewing China with the rose-colored glasses from 15 years ago or 20 years ago. It's not the same country. This is not the place where you have sweatshops or where people are making Nike sneakers. Folks, this is a country that their middle class has lower debt and more expendable income than we do at this point. This is a country where its largest economic sector is not manufacturing, which is a surprise to most Americans. It's actually banking. Four out of the 5 largest banks in the world are Chinese. So it's a different ballgame. So right now, China is the most liquid market. And when I tell most guys that are on Wall Street or in the city of London, when they hear that for the first time, they're like, no, they couldn't believe it. And then they actually go out and do their own research and they realize, holy crap, man, you're right. It is the most liquid market in the world. So China having a foothold there, and when the dollar goes pop, this is what I believe can happen. People say, oh, there's not enough percentage of the yuan. Well, here's the thing. When the dollar goes pop, China has enough liquidity to absolutely inject it like a 22-gauge syringe right into the IMF, into that basket to help stabilize it with no problems.
Well, and they also have this new way of doing that, and that's called the MSDR, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. And that is the new bond that the World Bank gave China the blessing to issue this new bond by way of the IMF. However, it's going to be issued in SDRs as the MSDR, but it's going to be redeemable in yuan or renminbi.
Right.
And that's once again very significant because that makes the MSDR more closely related to a currency than to a bond because it can become more liquid, just like what you were talking about. It can become more liquid in very short order.
Very quickly.
And it can be used at the retail level. You and I, me, Rory, can go and can purchase MSDR bonds, take them to our local bank and say, I want to build a garage out in the backyard and here's my collateral for the loan. And they'll go, great, here's your loan.
Yeah.
And that's a game changer.
It is a huge game changer. And it's basically the setup I believe for a temporary transition, while we transition out of the dollar, we're going to need an intermediary, and that MSDR, I believe wholeheartedly, is the intermediary until we get into this full blown system that they're rolling out. I mean, the handwriting's on the wall, Rory. I mean, we could all feel it at this juncture, man. It's pretty much game over. We're just waiting for the fat lady to sing at this juncture, man.
Right. I mean, in the issuance of the first round or the first tranche of MSDRs has already sold out.
Yep.
And even to my surprise, I knew it was going to sell out. It sold out at 2.5 times the issuance.
Yep.
In other words, there was 2.5 times more request for this bond than they're actually issuing. I mean, if that is, when I read that, it was just like, oh my God. And I want to stay with gold because that is a huge piece of what is happening. And you know, Rickards has been calling for $7,000 to $10,000 gold, and he's been alluding to exactly like what you were just saying, as far as a gold back note that's going to be part of the global trade. Yep. How do you see that impacting? First of all, is that possible? And second of all, what impact would that have on private citizens? I mean, how are they going to allow you and I to hold gold? Are they going to confiscate it? Are they going to tax it into oblivion? Or is it going to be outlawed like they did in the mid-30s?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's a lot of variables there that we can look at and we can attack. 15 years ago or 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, you asked me that question, Rory, I would tell you that they'd probably confiscate it, they'd probably control it, and we'd probably have to create, in any country where, getting a hold of gold is difficult. There's always a burgeoning black market. That would have been my answer. But the question, because there's been so many variables, so many monkey wrenches that have been thrown into the globalist gears, that they're pretty much knocked back on their heels. They are scurrying, and they've made a lot of mistakes. And I think it all depends on this. And this is the answer. This is what's very important for the audience to realize. It all depends on who controls the narrative. That's what it depends on. No matter who wins the election, okay, we're heading for an economic collapse. That's why it's smart of Trump to say, if there's a collapse coming, hopefully it happens before I get in. Okay, he's letting the public know that. And in Monday's debate, he said that there was, we're in a major, huge bubble, as he would say. It's tremendous bubble. Yeah. it's huge. It's tremendous. It's huge. It's tremendous bubble, Rory. I just cannot believe it's tremendous. It's huge. So there's this huge bubble that's being blown. So when this thing goes pop, if the globalists are still the shot callers, they're the ones who are able to still make the decisions on the other side of this thing, then we stand to lose. But if we keep the momentum that we're doing, all of us, guys like yourself in alternative media, getting the word out there, and we are helping the awakening of the American public, okay, and the world public at large. And, if we can keep that momentum going on the other side of this collapse, these guys will not have a narrative that they can control, because they already do not control the narrative. And it doesn't matter how many false flags they pull off, and it doesn't matter how many financial fraud they got to do. Nobody believes them. That's why when people say, "Oh, Hillary Clinton, she dominated that debate." No, she didn't. No. Trump was playing possum. He didn't want to seem the aggressor, because of course here's this dainty woman. So what did he do? He let the dainty woman become the aggressor. He let the mainstream media, what's the name? Lester Dolt. Yeah, Lester Dolt become the aggressor. And so Trump stood there and he let them. That's what he said. I'm going to be nice. There's some things I could say, but I'm not going to say it. It's huge. It's tremendous. So he's not going to say it. So the next that October 8th debate, that's when the gloves comes off. He's going to razor her, and I'll be surprised if she doesn't pass out and drop a couple of loads into her adult diapers at the same time.
Well, that's why I watched the debate. I wanted to see her pass out. And
I'm waiting for all sorts of things. Yeah, same here. Everybody was waiting for that, because nobody buys it. Nobody buys. Nobody buys it. See, this is not about Trump trying to establish who he is. this whole debate, this whole race is about Hillary Clinton and the establishment, because it doesn't matter if it's Hillary. Trump could run against anybody else. Hillary's just a shill. She's a puppet. This is about Trump versus the establishment. And the whole thing comes down to is, can this establishment candidate define who they are and prove to the American public they are not as bad as they seem to be, which they cannot do because they lost the narrative. Everywhere they look, the elites have lost the narrative. They're obsolete. They
They're
can't compete
obsolete.
with. They are. They're obsolete elites, Rory, because they can't compete with guys like you on the media who gets fresh news and tells it like it is. They can't compete with guys like myself and the larger other venues that are out there. They can't compete with us because we're too fast for them. The information is too fast and too fluid. They're waiting on news wires. We have Twitter and we got smartphones. We create the news, and this is where it's going. I mean, these online ghettos, like they've created with Facebook and Twitter. They thought they can contain and control information. They can control anything.
Right.
They have as much control over the information as Hillary Clinton has over her own bowel movements at this point now.
Which is not very much.
Not very much.
Oh, I want to ask you another question, and it dovetails it kind of into what we were talking about, because Trump, during the debate, he didn't really attack the Fed, but he definitely let people know that they are on his watch list.
Yep.
And the Federal Reserve last December, when they did their rate raise, they vowed to raise the rates 4 different times during 2016. So far, they've raised it exactly 0.
Right.
And according to Brandon Smith over at Alt-Market, these monetary criminals have never once made a commitment that they haven't stuck to in some degree.
Right.
If the Fed does as they did last December and sneak in a tiny rate hike, would the market crash as it did in January, and would they be able to contain it? I mean, what do you see happening between now and year's end?
That's a great question. I think I think it's right now that's being done is a perception game. I mean, the markets are fictitious. They're about as real as a $3 bill.
Exactly.
It's a perception game. This is the perception game they're playing with investors, because at the end of the day, there's enough manipulation in the market that even if a raise of 0.25% doesn't really hurt the domestic market, okay? Because it's all fake. It's manipulated. The real economy is crumbling and falling in onto itself. The artificial make pretend fantasy economy, the fantasy casino, is running at full tilt without any sort of impedance whatsoever. And we see that with every day is a high day. Like one day the Dow goes down 500 points, the next day it's up 700. So it's things of that sort. It's just chicanery and manipulation. So it's a perception game. But one of those things, the main reason that where those rate hikes do affect is U.S. bonds, is U.S. Treasuries. Mm-hmm. That trigger will set off a whole bunch of other derivatives. And no matter how good or how advanced a computer algo trading system is in manipulating the Dow and manipulating the S&P, that type of derivative trigger is unmanageable. We just don't have the computational software available to mitigate that type of an event. And when that does happen, it's going to set off a chain reaction, the likes of which it will be like a whole bunch of financial Hiroshimas going off in succession like a daisy chain. Can they raise the rates? Yeah, they can. Are they going to do it? They possibly could. We don't know yet, because we're at that juncture. I'm of the school of thought that there's no way they're going to raise the rates. They got to keep the charade going as much as possible. But if they actually do say, hey, you know what, we're going to raise rates, that means they've extracted as much wealth as they can possibly get from the market, and now they're ready to pack it in and hightail it out of Dodge.
Yeah, I agree with that, because they know. I mean, they're the ones that designed the thing to implode, and it's by their word and their policy that it will implode. Period.
Right. Period.
And it just amazes me, V, that people cannot seem to wrap their brain around the fact that the Federal Reserve, everything that they say, everything that they do, is strictly for their benefit and for their member banks' benefit. It has nothing to do with the economy, has nothing to do with the United States, and it certainly doesn't have anything to do with the citizens. I mean, I can't understand why people can't seem to wrap their head around that idea, but it is what it is. And last question. I've got an article that I'm going to publish later today on inflation.
Mm-hmm.
And the IMF, they just, quote, sounded the alarm bell about low inflation, end quote. Inflation is theft through stealth means. We
Correct.
are once again experiencing massive inflation in the housing market. The bubble has got to be close to going pop.
Ooh, it is.
Can it be avoided? And if so, how? And if not, what happens from here?
I think we're entering a period which will, when this whole thing goes belly up, Rory. I think we're going to head into a phenomenon that's called stagflation. You know, I always hear arguments from guys who are the deflationist versus the hyperinflationist. Well, I kind of take the middle road. I'm a stagflationist, and what that means is going to be negative growth and extremely high prices. Okay, it's basically going to be a broken currency. Stagflation is a unique phenomenon. I think it only happened like one other time in history that I could think of. And what it is, it's basically the economy is contracting into itself. There's no jobs, and the price of everything is starting to rise at an alarming rate. And we're kind of seeing that right now. And if you look at the like, a lot of the deflationists will come out. Look, there's deflation. Look, deflation in the market. We're going to deflate. You got to understand one thing. The way I liken the scenario is kind of like a tsunami. You know, picture us. We're all like in a beach in Thailand, and me and Rory, we just got done surfing. I'm sitting down and picking lint from my belly button, and Rory's building a sandcastle. And all of a sudden, like, you know, we see the tide rescinding from the beach, rescinding from the shore, and most people will see that like, oh look, the tide is rescinding, and it'll probably happen, you know, not that fast, maybe a little bit slowly. That's deflation. It's the liquidity leaving the marketplace. Okay, and things are, you know, we're facing a deflation in asset prices, which we're witnessing right now. Okay, so that tide is being sucked out. That means liquidity is leaving. I mean, there is practically we're in a liquidity crisis. We're in a solvency crisis, but we're not seeing that all that energy from that tide being pulled out to shore is being stored and is being, you know, generated into a massive tidal wave. So we're here, you know, I'm picking lint from my belly button, looking at what the gold prices are of the day, and you know, you're frolicking in the water on a boogie board, and all of a sudden, you know, 20 miles out from shore is a massive, you know, 50-foot tsunami heading our way at like 300 miles an hour. That's hyperinflation. So we're in this stage where that tidal wave is literally one trigger event from happening. It's coming. So hyperinflation is a real reality of what we're going to head into. On top of that, it's going to affect and disjoint asset prices. It's going to disjoint earnings. It's going to disjoint so many things. It's the worst of both scenarios, and we can thank the Fed and the central bankers for this one.
Yes, we can thank them for all of the
All of it.
nightmare that we're living through.
Yep.
I mean, this has been foisted upon us. I didn't wake up one morning and go, you know, if I only had a devalued currency, my life would be a lot better. You know, if I only had somebody stealing all of my wealth, then life would be great. It would be so much better. I don't remember anybody ever waking up saying that ever.
I know, never.
And these scumbags think that, you know, I mean, for the IMF to come out and say that, you know, the alarm bell has been sounded because of low inflation. I mean, my interpretation of that is, well, we're not stealing enough from the people because inflation is nothing more than theft.
Correct.
And for any time that,
It's a hidden tax.
Yeah, it really is. It's a hidden tax is all that it is. I said that was my last question. I lied.
No worries.
Before we started this show, you were telling me about some connections that you have in China and Hong Kong specifically, and that you have some connections to some high-ranking people within what's happening with the IMF and the SDR and the BRICS. Can you kind of share
Yeah,
anything with us that
absolutely.
would be helpful for us to understand
I had a
the sheer magnitude of what's happening with the New Silk Road, the BRICS, the SDR, and the whole scene that's been painted throughout this whole conversation of
yeah.
collapse.
I had an interesting talk with Professor Zhu, who is an inside member of President Xi Jinping's inner circle. They were both college buddies, very good friends. And Professor Zhu said something that was very profound. He said, um, at every level and at every step, we've allowed the Americans and we've invited the Americans to partake of the New Silk Road. And at every turn of the corner, the U.S. has said no, and they said no emphatically. For those who are listening and hearing about the New Silk Road for the first time, I'll tell you this. What the New Silk Road is the integration of Asia, Eurasia, and Europe, pretty much. Okay, it's the integration of Eurasia and Europe and the entire Western Hemisphere on the European side, so to speak. The New Silk Road is going to be an actual route, by land that cuts the sea route from 40 days down to 12 days. Okay, and if they get those high-speed rails up, it'll probably cut it down to 10 days.
Yep.
The New Silk Road is a road that's only for commercial as well as military traffic. It is an expansive highway with high-speed rails, interconnecting multiple nations, interconnecting some of the most resource-rich nations on the planet. It connects nations that will make up, over 60 to 70% of about 60% of global GDP, 70 to 80% of global trade. All of it will be running through the New Silk Road. It will run from the tip of Korea, the city of Busan. It will run all the way through India, through Pakistan, through China, through all the stands. Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, on into Estonia, Russia, Latvia. All these nations. I mean, there's so many of these nations that are signed up for this project because it helps everybody. And on top of the land route, there's also a new sea route that's being done thanks to the canals that will be built in Thailand that will circumvent the Strait of Malacca. And all the sea routes also will cut the typical 40 some odd day journey via sea into a more manageable 20 days or something like that. And that would also be connecting all sorts of port cities. I've also spoken to the Egyptian ambassador to the UN, where they detailed what's called the new Suez Canal Zone. And the new Suez Canal Zone is a huge expansion project for the Suez Canal and all the industry that will be built around it. And it's interesting that Donald Trump's already spoken to President al-Sisi of Egypt. Okay, so it's incredible. The new Suez Canal Zone will also connect with Israel's Leviathan platform, because the Israelis are starting to smarten up a little bit and starting to realize, hey, you know what, maybe we shouldn't go along with this crazy suicide pact that the U.S. has, and is interconnecting all these energy zones, all these ports, all these economies, all these industries, and everybody will flourish, and all of them. And the problem why the U.S. doesn't want to be a part of it is because everybody will be trading in something other than the dollar. They will not be using the dollar for settlement of trade, and that is the biggest reason why the U.S. got their panties in a bunch. And we're that's why our media is saying, oh, look, Chinese aggression in the South China Seas. Look at that, Chinese aggression. And meanwhile, these are islands in the South China Seas that have traditionally been in Chinese territorial waters since 640 AD. Okay, China built six islands. I'll give you an example. Vietnam has over 30 islands in the South China Seas that you just randomly just take over. Nobody says anything. China developed 6 islands that traditionally have been there since 640 AD, and everybody has a conniption fit. I mean, come on. Yeah. So this is the type of nonsense that's happening. The New Silk Road and the New Silk Belt is changing global business forever. Okay, that is why the City of London in England and Frankfurt, Germany, and in some of the European powers, Australia, New Zealand, the oceanic powers, they are all wanting to be a part of this initiative because they understand there's going to be trillions of dollars to be made in terms of commerce and business and work.
And the thing is that these are new markets.
Yes.
These are not old established markets that are already all built out. These are brand new markets.
Exactly. This is the frontier of pretty much it's going to be the frontier of new markets. Absolutely. And we don't want to go. We don't want to get involved in that party because there's not a punch bowl there that we can put a turd in. So we're not interested.
Exactly. The one of the main things about the New Silk Road or the One Belt One Road project is that it's already being built out. The planning stages is in the rearview mirror.
Yep.
They've already ran their first train route that was a signal, in my opinion, was a signal to the West that we're done with you guys because it went from China to Tehran, which is the capital of Iran.
Yep.
That was a huge signal. This was back in February. So, I mean, they've got everything's already happening. It's happening right now.
Yep.
And over the course, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, V, I see it over the course of the next 15 to 25 years before everything really starts to flourish and it really takes hold. I mean, it may not take that long, but that's what I really see happening, and it's working in conjunction with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization.
Correct.
And the Shanghai Cooperation Organization will encompass about 50% of the global population. And like you said, the New Silk Road, that whole project, it's the largest infrastructure project in the history of the world. It makes the Marshall Plan look like
a Boy Scout project.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, it's nothing in comparison. So
nothing. I mean, it makes the Marshall Plan look like a kindergartner's arts and crafts project, Rory. That's what it makes it look like.
Yes, really does. I mean, it's amazing, and nobody talks about it. There's not a peep in the mainstream media about it at all.
Correct.
I mean, it's just incredible, and it's coming, and it's going to change the economy around the world permanently.
Yep.
At least, well, maybe not permanently, but for at least the next 100 years.
Easily.
So, well, V, is there anything else that we should leave them with?
No. I think that's about it. If anybody wants to follow me, you can check me out on roguemoney.net. That is our premier flagship website where we write all sorts of articles. Great contributors there. You could also follow me on Rogue Money, the YouTube channel, which we just recently launched that. Follow me on there and follow me on Twitter at the Rogue Money. That's about it, man.
And if you're not listening to Mornings with V, then you're missing out. That's all I can say.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it.
Well, it's a great program. So
thank you.
But I certainly appreciate all your time, and I hope we can do this in the not too distant future. There, V.
1,000%. Anytime you want me on, just let me know, Rory. I'll be there for you.
All right, buddy. Have a good afternoon, and I'll talk to you soon.
Take care, my friend. Bye-bye.